Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. Happy Saturday. Hopefully, you're out enjoying the day, enjoying whatever good weather we can find, as apparently an atmospheric river is on the way to the northwest, and we're going to be in for it for the next few days. So get out there while you can, get some fresh air before it all turns to absolute crap. I think also beware of downtown Seattle from a traffic perspective. I think the vice president's in town, so can only imagine what kind of snafus there are going to be there. But if you're listening to this show, you're going to get a reprieve from all that mess, because we're going to talk today about a topic that's been on my mind, and I've been honestly just too busy with other things to get situated and actually do the work, the research I needed to do in order to have any shot of doing this show properly. And even with the time, it's still an absolute crapshoot to figure this out. What am I talking about? I am talking about the fact that the Seahawks have a really messy and thin linebacker core. And I am not comfortable with the state of this linebacker core. And so what I wanted to do was take a look around the league and see if there were some options for the Seahawks here. And I did that. I spent a few hours combing through every single roster. I looked at which teams drafted players, which teams signed free agents, how that might shift and adjust the players that might be available. I looked at grades. I looked at all sorts of things. And I'm going to share with you the outcome of that research, because right now, folks, literally as it stands right now, if you had to play a game today, John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell would be your linebackers for the Seattle Seahawks, your inside linebackers. Now, there's people that are like, oh, well, we have Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu. Let me just be clear, folks. Those are outside linebackers. Those are edge players. Those are not off-ball linebackers. Completely different positions. So Derek Hall doesn't count, and Darrell Taylor doesn't count. None of those guys count. Let me just set the bit for you about who the Seahawks inside linebackers are as of right now. Now, Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson are the guys that they signed. They're both out with injury right now. They're both expected back. But Baker, has a wrist surgery he's recovering from, and apparently some lower leg issues. Dodson, not exactly sure. It doesn't sound too serious. But even if you had both of those guys, then still you are very thin behind. Who do you have behind? You drafted Tyrese Knight. And if you've been hearing the shows, even if you heard yesterday's show, Mike Macdonald's been very clear. He is a developmental player. It's going to take him some time. The game is very fast for him right now. He talked about him playing with the big boys, and it's only his fifth big boy practice. And it's going to take time. I think putting expectations that Tyrese Knight is going to get on the field and be a reliable contributor this year is too much in my estimation. You do have Drake Thomas, who you picked up from the Raiders last year. And he's a young player. There might be something there, maybe, but you don't know. I mentioned John Radigan, who's recovered from a knee surgery from a couple years ago, but is a pretty limited coverage linebacker, and I'm not sure how great of a fit that is for Mike Macdonald's defense. Patrick O'Connell, who was an undrafted free agent last year, showed some promise in preseason and is a fine, third string or practice squad kind of guy, but not a guy you want getting starting snaps. And then you get into this year's undrafted free agents. You've got Easton Gibbs, who I think has some promise, but to say that Easton Gibbs is the guy you're counting on is a lot. So it is already at the very top, Tyrell Dodson being your starter. Tyrell Dodson was an undrafted free agent who then got a shot finally with Buffalo last year and blew up and played really well at the end of last season. But you can't even be certain that Tyrell Dodson is who you hope he is. And beyond all of that, these guys are on short-term deals. So, you don't really have a linebacker plan beyond this year for the Seahawks. So with all that in mind, I wanted to kind of take a little trip through what options there may be for the Seahawks. Now, these are going to vary. There's a wide array of approaches here. Keep in mind, as I did as we went through this, that the Seahawks are a young team that are not realistically in contention for a Super Bowl this year. So you're not looking for the final piece of the puzzle. You're not looking for, this high-priced, high-quality player, veteran player that you can just plug in and it's going to be an all-pro for you. Or even just, whatever. That's not really the logic here. What could make sense is you could get a veteran player that is just a rotational option and some depth for you in case there are injuries. You could get a guy who maybe is the opposite of that. Maybe you get a guy who is a younger player and could be part of your solution longer term, and maybe another team, doesn't need him. Could be that there is a good linebacker on another team who's also young, but maybe stuck behind some other players, and maybe you trade some of your cornerback depth. Maybe you find a team that has a need at cornerback and you can swap one of your corners, whether it's a Mike Jackson or Kobe Bryant or, I don't know, maybe even a Trey Brown, depending on how you feel about things. I hope not, but that could be possible. I don't think Tariq Woolen is a realistic trade option at this point. I've talked about him before, but I thought that would have potentially made sense pre-draft. But now that where we are, I can't imagine it makes a ton of sense for them to move on from Woolen, at least at this stage. So let's get into it. I've got a pretty long list, and so it'll take a little bit of time to get through all these guys, and I'll try to explain the logic and thought through all of it. I would be surprised if anybody can name all 4 players that I've got on the front cover of this show. I certainly would not have been able to do it. I might not even be able to do it right now, and I'm the one that put them on there. So there's going to be some names you have not heard before, and I'll try to familiarize you with who they are. Let's get going. First name on the list is, we're going to start with the free agents, because these are guys you can get for nothing. It's just going to cost you some money and a roster spot. So if the Seahawks want to get any of these players that are free agents, they can simply sign them. And it's possible that could happen. The first player that I mentioned here is Shaquille Leonard. Now, Shaquille Leonard is kind of a fascinating one in that this guy was the defensive rookie of the year in 2018. Wasn't even that long ago. He made the Pro Bowl 4 straight years, made first team All-Pro 3 out of 4 years, and was a second team All-Pro the other year. So the first 4 years, he was either All-Pro first team or second team. And then he got injured and had surgery, and it was a pretty serious situation. He's had nerve issues in his lower back that have impacted his lower body and has affected his speed and his quickness. And his first year back from surgery, as kind of would be expected, was really not good in 2022. And when he played for the Colts last year, the team that drafted him, they eventually let him go. And that's a pretty damning decision for the Colts. The Colts basically gave up on a guy that had been one of their best draft picks ever. And you have to imagine it's because they just don't think he can play at this level anymore, and certainly wasn't worth the contract that they had given him. So he was picked up by the Eagles, and he played a little bit for the Eagles last year. And those are the grades that I have for you below, is what his grades were for the Eagles, because I think that is at least somewhat representative of the kind of player he was at the end of last season. Now, the Eagles have a significant linebacker issue as well, and they chose not to bring him back. So again, that's another strike, and that's why Shaquille Leonard is sitting out there at 28 years old, still unsigned. But he had a 66 grade overall, 69.2 against the run, which is pretty good. 78.2 in pass rush. That was only an 8 pass rush snaps, but he did record a sack and some pressures, so he did well in rushing the passer. He had a pretty weak coverage grade of 57.2. This had been something he was particularly good at early in his career. He's had 12 interceptions in his career, as many as 5 in a season. And so he was known as kind of a coverage linebacker, a kind of do-it-all linebacker. His best grades coverage-wise, his rookie year was 84.8, but generally he's been around a 65 to 70 graded coverage player. But he's just been an excellent overall linebacker. 70, 78, 79, 80 kind of linebacker when he was healthy. So in some ways, a perfectly fine type of player for the Seahawks to sign, because they have nothing to lose by bringing him in. If they don't like what they see, they can move on. Is he going to be better than John Radigan? Is he going to be better than Patrick O'Connell? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But he's available. So this is one of the options, and we'll keep going. Next on the free agent options, Zach Cunningham. He also was with the Eagles last year, 29 years old. He's 6'3", 230 pounds. Back when he was with the Texans, which the team that drafted him, he had some pretty big years. He had 164 tackles in 2020. I believe that was a year that he made the Pro Bowl. No, it does not look like he made the Pro Bowl that year. That's got to suck for him. But in any event, just a couple of years ago, he had a near elite run defense grade of 87.4. That's kind of who he is. He is not your movement linebacker. He is the thicker, run fit kind of guy. And so these are his last year grades. 67.6 overall, 71.5 run defense, 49.9 pass rush. Don't know how much that matters for the inside backer. And then 67.9 coverage grade. So he did have a decent coverage grade last year, and he played a lot in coverage, 519 coverage snaps. He gave up an 89.8 passer rating, had 6 pass breakups, which is pretty good, to be honest. So he had his best year as a coverage backer last year. And so this is a guy that certainly will be available, is available, and could be signed by the Seahawks. I see someone asking about whether John Radigan and well, Dotson definitely graded high in coverage last year, but as far as John Radigan goes, um, I mean, he didn't really play that much last year. I mean, I'm not sure he even played at all. Let me take a quick look on that front. He did play like a handful of snaps, but no, I mean, John Radigan, he played 21 snaps last year, and only 7 of them were in coverage. So I don't think there's a lot to go on for John Radigan as far as what he has to offer. All right, so let's keep going. That was Zach Cunningham. Quan Alexander, another free agent, the last of the free agents I'm going to cover. Quan Alexander at one point was considered one of the great linebackers in the NFL. He's never graded out particularly well from a PFF standpoint, for what it's worth. But back when he was with the Tampa Bay Bucks, the team that drafted him in 2017, he made a Pro Bowl. He's just kind of an all-around backer. He was kind of known as a coverage player to some extent. And he has had 9 interceptions throughout his career. I see a question from one of our YouTube members, and if you are a YouTube member, I will try to do my best to answer your questions live. So that's a benefit of being a club or suite level member. Bradley asked, did Devin Bush sign anywhere? Yes, he signed with the Cleveland Browns. Thanks for your question, and thank you for joining. You can join as a YouTube member. The link is pinned in the chat, and it's also in the description of the video. Great way to support the show, and a great way to also get more interaction with me and other folks in the community. All right, so as far as Quan Alexander goes, 30 years old, 6'1", 227 pounds, played for the Steelers last year. I do think it's worth noting he's been with 4 different teams in the last 4 years. He was with Pittsburgh last year. He's with the Jets the year before that. He was with the Saints the year before that. He was with the 49ers the year before that. He's kind of been passed around like town bike style. Everyone's taking him for a ride, but no one is keeping him. And I do think that it's a pretty good indicator, and the fact that he's still available, and the fact that he has a kind of well thought of name. People have thought of Quan Alexander, at least at some point, as a player worth trading for or a clear starter. The fact that he's not on any roster, and there's some like the Seahawks and others that have had some pretty big gaps at linebacker, not a particularly appealing situation. But his overall grade last year, 59.0, not great. 30.3 against the run. Yikes. And historically, he has not been a great run defender. A lot of pretty low grades over the years. His best season was in 2022 when he graded 63.6 against the run. But he's been pretty much atrocious against the run. He's also not a good tackler. He has a career missed tackle rate of 18%, which is not good. He missed 20% of his tackles last year with the Steelers. He does have a 79.9 pass rush grade and did have a 74.3 coverage grade. That is why I included him, because I do think Mike Macdonald puts a premium on coverage from his backers, and maybe he sees something there. In 186 coverage snaps, Quan Alexander only allowed a 67.1 passer rating, which is pretty crazy. No touchdowns, 1 interception, only a 63% completion rate. So he had a legitimately good year in coverage last year. Maybe that's something of interest. But again, these are the 3 free agent options. They all come with some pretty big caveats. That is why they're still free agents, but I needed to give them at least part of the conversation for the show. All right, now we're moving on. We're going to move into trade territory. And when I say trade, most of these cases are legitimately like, I think you'd have to trade for them. Some of them could be cap casualties, not likely, but possible. Some of them could be available. They could get pushed off the roster toward the end of training camp, depending on how things go. But in general, I'm just going to call them, they are on another roster. You'd have to probably give something up to get them. And we are going to start with what is a relatively familiar name, Shaq Thompson. He is on the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers are a worthwhile team to check in with because, among other things, one of John Schneider's best buddies, Dan Morgan, has taken over as general manager. And if you don't think that relationships have a direct impact on making these kinds of deals, I got news for you. It absolutely does. So if John Schneider's out there thinking, man, we got to find a linebacker, he's going to first check in with his buddies to see if they might have somebody that could shake loose. Now, Shaq Thompson is considered a pretty good player, former first-round pick. He is now 30 years old, though. For folks that don't know his background, 6 feet tall, 230 pounds. He is a former Husky, University of Washington. The reason I have Shaq Thompson on this list is he had an injury-plagued last year. He only played 68 snaps. And so the grades that I'm showing on here are his last year grades, but that was only 68 snaps. I can tell you about some of his other years to give you a better idea of what he's been. He also restructured his deal this year. So I'll give you the details on that. He took a pay cut to stay with the team. His base pay was reducing his base pay to $3.1 million. And that's also just where he is. Like, the team was willing to cut him if he didn't do this. So he is a little bit on that precipice. His deal has a bunch of void years, 4 void years. But they could trade him and take what would only be a $1 million dead cap hit this year if you're the Panthers. So it is possible. I don't know that it's likely, but it is possible. And the other piece to kind of understand here with Shaq Thompson is that the Panthers signed Josie Jewell from Denver for inside linebacker help. And they drafted Trevin Wallace. He was a pretty well thought of inside backer. If they really like what they see from Trevin Wallace, they could decide that they want to have him start and that Shaq Thompson would be more susceptible to being moved. I would also say that the Panthers are pretty crappy at the cornerback position. Their starting cornerbacks are J.C. Horn and Dane Jackson. Backups Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Bootle. This is a very thin cornerback room. And so if I'm the Panthers and the Seahawks come knocking, my good buddy John Schneider, if I'm Dan Morgan, my good buddy John Schneider comes knocking and says, hey, I'm interested in Shaq Thompson, and I'll give you Michael Jackson, or I'll give you I doubt Kobe Bryant would be enough, but there might be a couple players that are interest in that corner room that he'd be willing to swing a deal. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that Shaq Thompson could be a possibility. He's a guy that's, again, he's a starting quality player when healthy, but he is 30. He's a guy that you're not going to be building around. So there is some question about whether he's the right profile, but he's really a stopgap. He's not the long-term answer. All right, let's keep going. Raise your hand if you've heard of Damone Clark. I had not heard of Damone Clark. I didn't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. The reason Damone Clark is on this list, he is a 24-year-old former fifth-round pick of the Dallas Cowboys. He was drafted in 2022, and he actually got a fair number of snaps last year. He played 834 snaps for the Cowboys. But a couple of reasons that I think he could be on this list, or is on this list, and could be a possibility, is that one, Aiden Dirty, Seahawks' new defensive coordinator, was the defensive line coach for the Cowboys. So that's another relationship. He knows this player and could vouch for him or recommend him if he thinks that he's a good one. The Cowboys did draft Marist Liufau from Notre Dame early in this draft, third round. And they've got some other guys, Demarion Overshone, Damian Wilson. They've got some other guys that they could look to. And so there is a chance, and let me pull up, I had this somewhere. Whoops. So wait, hold on. Where was Marquise Bell on this list? Where did Marquise Bell go for them? Why am I missing that? So Marquise Bell was a guy that played for the Cowboys last year. Oh, did they have him play safety? Sorry, guys. I'm just looking at this up real time. Yeah, they do have him listed here as a safety. Last year, he played some linebacker for them and played quite well. So this is what was confusing to me. In one place, they listed him in the depth chart as safety, but I have him here as a linebacker. He played a lot of snaps at linebacker. And let me just double check how many snaps just to make sure we got all the same information. He played, 608 snaps in linebacker. So he was linebacker. Anyway, so my point here is they could look at Marquise Bell as a guy that they want to elevate. They've also got Marist Liufau. You've got this connection with Aiden Dirty. And So you've got this 6'3", 240-pound inside linebacker who's just 24 years old. He's just a 5th round pick too. I don't think that they're going to be super attached to a 5th round pick. And his grades are like, I mean, he's been okay. He hasn't been great, but he has a 62.7 overall grade. Against the run, he was 56.8. And pass rush, 55.5. Coverage, though, 68.8 coverage. And like I said, I do think that that's something that Mike Macdonald is going to put a premium on. He had a couple pass breakups last year. He also is an excellent tackler. Excellent tackler. Only missed 5.8% of his tackle chances last year, which is a pretty elite level tackling. His tackling grade, 83.6. So that doesn't show up here, but he's an elite tackler. And again, he's 24. So if Aiden Dirty likes him, if he's potentially available, and Mike Macdonald signs off on this is a guy, this could be someone who actually could be part of your long-term plans. So again, different profile than Shaq Thompson. You're going to see these different types of players, and it really is going to be eye of the beholder. What are you looking for? You're looking for a guy that could be part of your long-term future. You're looking for a guy that's just a stopgap to make sure you don't have an absolute void in the middle of your defense this year. That's kind of the discussion to have. All right. Another name you probably have not heard of. I had not heard of before I did this. Malik Harrison of the Baltimore Ravens. Malik Harrison was he was a round 3 selection of the Ravens in 2020. He's 26 years old, 6'3", 259 pounds. So he's a big boy at inside linebacker. I mean, most of these guys are 240 or below. So 260 is a big man at the inside linebacker spot. Former Ohio State Buckeye. He just signed a 1-year deal to return to Baltimore. So not a big commitment. It would only be $167,000 in dead money if they were to trade him. As I just said, relationships matter. And so that's part of why some of these guys are showing up. Mike Macdonald knows Malik Harrison. He coached Malik Harrison. And they also have relationships with John Harbaugh and that Baltimore organization. So if the Ravens, for example, are interested in anything that the Seahawks have to offer, they might just want draft picks, honestly. I don't know if they'll want Baltimore, like a good front office does, saw that they had some weakness at corner, and they went out and they drafted Nate Wiggins, and they drafted TJ Tampa. And so they've got some prospects there at the corner position. But I think that Malik Harrison's an interesting one. He had a 74.3 overall grade in just 226 snaps. He's only been a rotational kind of backup linebacker. The most snaps he's ever played was his rookie year. He played 301 snaps. Last 2 years, he's played 226 and 249 snaps. Last year was definitely his best season. 74.3 overall grade, 71.1 against the run, 66.5 against the pass. 66.5 pass rush grade, and then 69.4 coverage. So I think that he's a possibility. I mean, again, 1-year deal, but a young guy, and he kind of is in a profile that's could be part of your solution going forward if Mike Macdonald likes him. See, we got another question from one of our YouTube members. Again, join as a club or suite level member, and I'll do my best to answer your questions during the show. The link is pinned in chat. It's also in the description of the video. Do you think the Cowboys would be willing to trade Bell? I think he's talking about Marquise Bell. Going to be a free agent soon, and they have a lot of big contracts coming up. It's possible. I did not include him in this list because he played extremely well last year. And I don't think the Cowboys are going to be looking to move on from a young, extremely talented player. But you never know. But no, I did not include him. I think it's a fair question. By the way, if you are getting annoyed with like the ads that come up on YouTube, and I have heard that from some people, again, I'm going to recommend two options. One is my favorite, which is join as a patron member, patreon.com/hawkblogger. All of these shows are available ad-free, the audio versions for patrons immediately following. So patreon.com/hawkblogger. Plus you can listen to it without, if you're listening on the road or, walking somewhere, you don't have to have the video for YouTube up, draining your battery on your phone, whatever, or having it, your pocket tap it and turn it off. So patreon.com/hawkblogger is the easiest way to do it. You can also be a YouTube premium member. If you do that, I believe that will get rid of the ads. So appreciate the question. All right. So that was Malik Harrison. I think an interesting option. Next name on this list. Like another guy, I'm going to keep admitting I did not know Jamien Sherwood before doing this research. He was another 5th round selection, this time by the Jets out of Auburn. And he's a different profile size-wise. And one of the things to keep in mind here is the Seahawks could decide to add a weak side linebacker those guys are typically going to be on the lighter side. And they can move, if not necessary, Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson can play either position. And Jerome Baker is currently slated to be the weak side linebacker. If they acquired someone like Jamien Sherwood, who's 220 pounds and does not profile as a middle linebacker, but could be a weak side, then Jerome Baker could, play middle linebacker if for whatever reason Dodson wasn't available or something like that. So in any event, Sherwood was a 5th round pick out of Auburn. He's 24 years old, 6'2", 220 pounds, let's say. He's in the last year of his rookie deal with the Jets. And he is kind of an up-and-comer. He only played 193 snaps last year in what is a very talented Jets defense. And so one of the things you want to look for when finding quality at a position is what's a team that's kind of stacked at that position, because they won't be able to necessarily keep everybody. And when you talk about the Jets, this might be the best defense in the NFL. If not, it is close to it. And from a linebacker position, they've got CJ Mosley, they've got Quincy Williams, who they signed, I think, from Jacksonville. They've got, sorry, I'm looking at a couple of their names, but they've got a few guys here. Jamien Sherwood's probably their best option after those guys, but he is entering his final year. His overall grade last year in those 193 snaps, 76.1 overall, 78.9 against the run. So even though he's a lightweight guy, he has been exceptional against the run. 79.4 pass rush grade. Now, he only had 7 pass rush snaps and 1 pressure in that. So it seems like that's kind of something questionable. But his coverage grade was 56.7. He only had 45 coverage snaps. He gave up 8 receptions and 8 targets. So every pass thrown his direction was completed. He did give up a touchdown and gave up basically a perfect passer rating. So that's a concern, and probably is what's keeping him from getting more snaps. But again, 24 years old, up-and-coming player. Could he be someone that the Seahawks look to grab potentially from the Jets. Next guy, different profile completely from these other players. Jermaine Pratt. This is a guy I was kind of like hoping the Seahawks would look at free agency wise last year. He ended up re-signing a big deal with the Bengals. And I think it makes it's not a shock that that he would potentially be available now 1 year after his signing his deal, because he kind of fell back to earth last year. He's 28 years old. He's 6'3", 240 pounds. Like I said, just signed a big deal last year. It would cost $2.3 million in dead cap if the Bengals chose to trade him. And why would they do that? Well, they are not good at the cornerback position. It's pretty ugly, to be honest. I will read you their cornerback situation. They've got DJ Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt, and you can debate how good those guys are. They've got DJ Ivy and Joe Bacci behind them. I think that there's reason that they could potentially be looking to upgrade that corner group. The challenge with the deal here is I'm not sure that they've really got someone to step up in Pratt's place. So I don't think this is very likely at all. I listed it just because there is some potential there. His overall grade, 62.6, run defense, 66.5, pass rush, 60.1, and his coverage, 57.9. Actually, something's wrong. These are not his grades. Let's do this again. I'm going to edit this real time so we have the right numbers in here. Sorry, folks. He was 63.3 overall. He was 57.3 against the run, which should be tagged as not good. His pass rush grade was 63.5. And his coverage grade was 65.3. That makes a little bit more sense. That should be tagged as mediocre. So let's try that again. The reason, I still why would you care about this guy? Well, he was a 90.1 coverage player like 2 years ago. He was an 80.6 linebacker 2 years ago. He was a 73.2 pass rusher 2 years ago. So he might have just had a career year and that's that. But maybe you can buy low on a guy like this. But I think this one's pretty unlikely. All right, Nick Niemann. Another name. Didn't know before I did this. So why is Nick Niemann on here? He plays for the Chargers. Who is the coach, the new coach of the Chargers? Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh, another relationship-based potential opportunity. And Nick Niemann is 26 years old. He's 6'3", 244 pounds. He was a 6th-round draft pick back in 2021. So he is in the last year of his rookie deal. And they just drafted Junior Colson. And they also are in need of cornerbacks. Their cornerback depth is not great. Asante Samuel Jr. is good, but their other starting cornerbacks, Christian Fulton. Their nickelback is Jasir Taylor. They did draft Cam Hart, but who knows how he's going to be. Dean Leonard. I mean, this is not a great cornerback room. And so you combine the fact that the Seahawks have a relationship, or at least Mike McDonald does, with Jim Harbaugh. Nick Niemann is young. He's in the last year of his deal. He only played 247 snaps last year, and he may not play even as many this coming season, depending on how Junior Colson's going to play. I think this guy's an interesting possibility. His overall grade last year, 71.6. His run defense grade, 64.5. Pass rush grade, 66.0. And his coverage grade, 71.2. I think that's a really interesting profile. He did have 5 pressures and 18 pass rush snaps, which is decent. His missed tackle rate, I didn't even read his tackle grade. I put it on here. It's 80.2. He is a 2.9% missed tackle rate, so he's been an excellent tackler. In coverage, did not give up a touchdown. So I think Nick Niemann, to me, is an interesting name to keep an eye on that you probably would have never heard of before, but could be someone to keep an eye on heading into what happens next for the Seahawks. We aren't done. We got a lot left. Let's keep going. Otis Reese, the fourth. Otis Reese, the fourth. This guy is a 2023 undrafted free agent for the Titans. He's 25 years old. He's 6'3". It says here 214 pounds. That is extremely light. So let's guess maybe he's pushing up towards 220 at this point, but still very, very, very light for a linebacker. He only played 90 snaps last year. And then Tennessee signed Kenneth Murray at linebacker. They drafted Cedric Gray. They drafted James Williams, the safety at Miami that is likely going to play linebacker in the NFL. Is there a chance that he becomes a cut toward the end of the year, or they try to put him on the practice squad and you can sign him? But this was a guy that played particularly well when he got his chances. And he had especially a great game against Houston. Kayvon Wallace should have some idea about who he is, having played with him. The Seahawks did play against him. His first game was week 16 last year against the Seahawks at home. But he finished with a 76.9 overall grade, 69.1 against the run. So you worry about a guy that light against the run, but he did seem to do pretty well. His pass rush grade, 56.5. Again, don't think that matters that much for his position. In fact, if I could do this all over again, I'd probably make that a tackling grade that I'd show that matters more. But in any event, it is what it is. The tackling grade was 61.2, if you're curious. And his coverage grade was 75.6. That is interesting. That's in 43 coverage snaps. He only gave up 6 yards per pass. So is he a guy that could be interesting here? And might the Titans be a group that is looking to bolster other parts of their roster? Another Titan option, Jack Gibbons. Now, Jack Gibbons is slated, I think, to be a starter for the Titans. So this would be a bigger deal to go after Jack Gibbons. But Gibbons was also an undrafted free agent, 2022. He is 25 years old, 6'3", 242 pounds. And again, Tennessee signed Kenneth Murray. They drafted Cedric Gray and James Williams. If those guys develop and they want to get them on the field, then Gibbons is not a guy that they've got a lot of money invested in. And they could decide yeah, we'll be willing to trade for a draft pick or be willing to trade for a corner or some other position where maybe receiver. I mean, for the for the Titans, it might make more sense to be thinking about a receiver from the Seahawks, of which the Seahawks are pretty darn deep in. Their receivers are Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyler Boyd, Treylon Burks. So maybe they don't need a receiver as much as they used to. I still don't particularly love that group, but I'm going to ask the Titans in whatever deal they do to throw in Tavondre Sweat, but I know they won't do that. But yeah, it's more, I think the question there is, do they have reason where they'd potentially expose a guy like Gibbons? I don't think this is likely. 71.2 overall grade, 72.9 against the run, 77.4 pass rush, 75 tackler, 61.3 coverage. So he's just a very solid overall linebacker. Under club control, cheap deal. I don't think they're going to be in any rush to get rid of him, but I did list him on here just as a possibility. Jamin Davis. You may or may not remember this name. Jamin Davis is a former first-round pick, 19th overall out of Kentucky for the Washington Commanders. He is 25 years old. He's 6'3", 234 pounds. And he's in the last year of his rookie deal. He's kind of on the outs. He's considered a bust. And he's played a lot of snaps for them. 581 his rookie year, 833 second year, and then 742 in his third year. So they've given him plenty of chances, and he's just never been that great for them. And now you've got a new regime. You've got new front office. You've got new coaching staff. You also signed Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner. So is there a place for this guy in the Commanders roster? Are they going to cut him? Could he be available for a cheap trade? He's the exact kind of profile that could be interesting for the Seahawks. 67.6 overall grade last year. He wasn't terrible. His run defense grade, 76.1, is darn good. His tackling grade was 77.6. He only missed 5.6% of his tackles. Pass rush grade, 71.6. His coverage grade was not good, and it's never been good, 56.5. He gave up 3 touchdowns last year, had 3 pass breakups and an interception, but also had 3 penalties in coverage. So he's a project at coverage and may not be viable in coverage as a linebacker, and that would be a potential deal breaker. But again, John Schneider has relationships with Adam Peters, obviously with Dan Quinn. This guy's on the outs. They've got new guys in this position. So I think Jamin Davis is another name that could be a potential option for the Seahawks. Continuing. Now we're in a different group. I can't remember how many more of these I've got, but this is less about trade, more about practice squad, really. And whether there's practice squad guys that you could snatch from other teams. And there was this kind of, I don't know how I describe it, but this this thing that Chris Trapasso did last year, and maybe he's done it in previous years, where he did practice squad power rankings. And in the final week of last season, he had his top 10 list of best practice squad players across the whole NFL. And one of those names was Joe Giles Harris, who is a practice squad linebacker for the Patriots. He listed him again as 7th on that list. He's not played, so there's no rankings here, or there's no grades here, but he was a very efficient tackle I'll just read you what Trapasso says as a description. Giles Harris was a tackling machine at Duke, and while he didn't test particularly well, his instincts and tackling reliability have kept him in the league. After 2 years in Jacksonville and 2 with the Bills, which featured some quality preseason play, the large off-ball backer now resides on the Patriots roster. Now they can talk this from last year. So he says, and Bill Belichick has always loved some oversized second-level defenders. He deserves an opportunity in the season finale against the Jets. Well, he didn't get that, but he is still with the Patriots, and I'm listing him here because if he's blocked on another team, maybe he's like the bar you're trying to clear is John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell and Easton Gibbs. Maybe he's better. So I wanted to list Joe Giles Harris. Same kind of concept here. Shaka Hayward with the Bengals on their practice squad last year. He was number 9 on Chris Trapasso's list. He also was a Duke player. He says Hayward was one of the defensive pieces to the Duke program that went 9-4 in 2022. His supreme length allowed him to disrupt football, often in coverage. 6 pass breakups and 2 interceptions, and he was one of the more sure tackling linebackers in the entire 2023 class. He ran a 4.53 at nearly 6'3", 235 with 34-inch arms and has a tackling radius most second-level defenders would dream of. The coverage will take time. It always does for every linebacker, but he can be a useful sideline-to-sideline tackler if Cincinnati needs him. The Bengals do not at the moment. So while I had Jermaine Pratt on here earlier and they have Logan Wilson as their other starter, is Shaka Hayward a guy that the Seahawks decide to steal off the Bengals roster or practice squad? So that's the list, guys. That is the list of many linebackers that I've looked at. Curious if there are any others that came out in your mind that you thought I should list that I didn't. There was someone on Twitter that said, oh, I thought Leo Chanel should be on the list. I mean, Leo Chanel would be fantastic, but I don't understand why the Chiefs would really think about doing that deal. Chanel's a starter for them at strong side backer. They've got Nick Bolton and Drew Tranquil as their other 2 backers in a 4-3 defense. And I don't see the clear guys that would step in for Chanel if they moved on from him. So I don't think that makes sense. But I'll mention it since someone else did. Any other players you guys had in mind? I mean, obviously, I dug deep there. My guess is that most of you have not known the names of a lot of those guys that I mentioned. And I'll swing through the names one more time real quick. I'd love to hear, if you don't have names that I didn't mention, which of the names that I brought up do you find most intriguing? Let me run through the list one more time. I'll do it much more quickly this time. But let's take a look at the names. Shaquille Leonard, free agent. Zach Cunningham, free agent. Quan Alexander, free agent. So factor in, maybe pick who would you be your top free agent option of those 3? Shaquille Leonard, Zach Cunningham, Quan Alexander. And then as far as trade targets, who would be your top trade target? Shaq Thompson from the Panthers. Damon Clark from the Cowboys. Malik Harrison from the Ravens. Jamian Sherwood from the Jets. Jermaine Pratt from the Bengals. Nick Neiman from the Chargers. Otis Reese IV from the Titans. Jack Gibbons from the Titans. Jamin Davis from the Commanders. Joe Giles Harris as a potential roster cut from the Patriots, and Shaka Hayward as another roster cut possibility from the Bengals. I will tell you my rough rankings here as I've gone through this. I think Nick Niemann might be number one on my list. The combination of age, coverage ability, size, likelihood of potentially being available, connection with Harbaugh. He's if not number one, he's close for me. I mean, Jamian Sherwood would be really cool. I don't know how realistic that is, but he seems like a rocket ship at linebacker, but his coverage grade is a concern. I'm just not sure how realistic, but I really would love that. Malik Harrison is an interesting one. His size is just kind of crazy to me. 260 is just like, I don't understand that. That's profiles much more as an edge player, but who knows? So he's one. I'm not as into the Damon Clark option. His coverage grade is appealing. I think the Shaq Thompson one's an interesting one. I don't think it's going to happen, but he's a good player. He's a solid leader. He has connections to the Northwest. Dan Morgan and John Schneider have connection together. And there's reason to think the Seahawks have some of what the Panthers need, and that the Panthers have some guys that they've brought in that they might want to clear space for to take playing time. So I don't think that's a crazy unrealistic one. I think that could possibly happen. But the Nick Niemann one makes a lot of sense. Otis Reese is a little light for me, so I'm not huge on that. The Jamin Davis one, I have concerns about a guy that was a first-round pick that got all those snaps and that still is just not that good so far. Maybe he'd be different in a Mike McDonald defense, but as far as realistic, I think this guy could definitely be available. And I think the connections with John Schneider to that Commanders team make it potentially realistic. So those are the guys that really kind of stand out for me. I think Nick Niemann is the guy for most. And then, the free agents, I don't know. I mean, if you're going to sign a free agent, try for the guy that maybe is going to be the strongest in coverage. Maybe you grab Quan Alexander and you don't care if you cut him. Maybe it's a Shaquille Leonard and you hope that you get super fortunate with the medicals and he recovers. Zach Cunningham is just kind of this vet. Like, he will take snaps. He won't be great. He won't be awful. So none of the free agents excite me too much. But those are the ones that kind of stick out for me. Folks, if you don't know what's happening tomorrow, let me tell you, because you are going to want to set your YouTube dial to this channel at 2:00 Pacific time tomorrow. For the first time ever, Rob Staten, Griffin Sturgeon, C. Mike Spin Move, Jeff Simmons, and I will be doing a NFC West mock draft. We are each going to be donning general manager hats. We're going to be drafting 4 different teams using only the rosters of the NFC West teams. We'll each end up with 12 players at the end of the draft. And then we will decide who we think had the best draft. And we will obviously not have complete teams, but I'm going to spend some of the rest of my day today, maybe a little bit tomorrow, getting my draft board set. The guys are doing the same thing. And I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I have no idea. going to be halfway just watching the whole thing unfold myself. It's going to be a lot of fun. It should be interesting. We are doing it with an eye on not who's the best players this year, but if we were drafting and building a team for the next 3 years, who would we pick? So contracts will come into play, age will come into play, injury history, as well as how good the player is, and also positional value and where we feel like we would be needing a guy to fill out a part of our roster. So tune in tomorrow, 2:00 for that. Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a long show, probably a couple hours, but should be entertaining. And please, if you haven't already, give this show a like, click subscribe, become a YouTube member. The link is in the chat. It's also in the description of the video, and become a patron, patreon.com/hawkblogger. I'll be posting the audio without ads immediately following this show, and you can get that as well as access to the Slack channel where we talk Mariners, we talk Seahawks, we talk all about NFL news. All you got to do, join at patreon.com/hawkblogger, and you get access right away. All right, folks, I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at hawkblogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.